Well, welcome back to XR Industry Leaders Podcast. I am your host, Brad Scoggin, CEO and co-founder of ArborXR, joined with my co-host, Will Stackable, who's also a co-founder and our CMO. And today we get to sit down with Kevin Marcum from Delta Airlines. Kevin is the program manager for ACS Learning, and Delta is currently putting all new ramp hires through VR training, which is pretty impressive. Kevin, it's great to have you on the show today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Excited for this podcast.
Yeah, I just want to go ahead and dig in. It's interesting and I'll say also impressive that you have been at Delta for 28 years. I think, I don't know that many people who can stick it out anywhere. So kudos there. But I'd love to hear about, you've been there a long time. What has been the process for Delta starting to both consider and then actually roll out XR training?
Yeah, I can kind of back you up a few years when it came into the scope to look at VR. I was meeting with our senior vice president of ACS domestic stations at the time, and she mentioned that she was at a conference where they had VR and she wanted me to look into it. At that time, I had never even had a VR headset on, so it was very new to me also. I just basically went back to my office and Googled VR in Atlanta, and a couple companies came up. The first one that came up was Dave Beck with Foundry 45, and I contacted Dave and went and met with him at his office, and he put a headset on me, showed what it was all about, talked through it, and he was great to work with and very patient with me as we went through the process. So that's how we got started with the VR.
And what year was that?
That was 2017, late 2017, when we started looking into it.
Yeah, that's cool. That's I feel like you've been in it a long time. I also think it's really interesting. I think sometimes I feel like the trade shows, the conferences, it's kind of like, it's just beneficial, but there's a lot of people who are finding XR at a trade show, one, and then two, it's still like, what was the magic moment for you? It was putting on the headset, which I just think are important takeaways.
Yeah, I mean, by putting on the headset and it really just put me in the real world when Dave put me into the headset and had me do some things and picking up items and moving, and it was just an aha moment that this really can fit with our program. And when we started doing the proof of concept and putting it all together and actually getting to see the airline in the VR and getting to see the ramp operation in the VR, I knew that it was going to be a game changer for the ACS learning department and Delta as a whole.
Did you expect to, when you put the headset on, to be impressed? Are you a technologist do you consider yourself a early adopter, or were you surprised at how immersive and connected?
I think I was very surprised how immersive it was. I didn't consider myself, and still don't consider myself, a technology expert, but it really surprised me how immersive you put into it. And that was 2017. It doesn't seem like that long ago, but things have really progressed since then. And I'm still, to this day, when I put a headset on and look at something, I'm still amazed of what it does. I mean, even the ones that we use every day, I still put them on and just think, wow, I can't believe this really just puts you right in the operation and makes you feel like you're right there on the ramp.
So if I'm a new employee at Delta and I'm going to go through this, I put the headset on. What am I experiencing? What all have you built?
Yeah, so the first thing they're going to experience as a new hire is our welcome to Delta virtuality. When we first did our proof of concept and we talked about different ideas of what we could do, this was one that I always wanted to do. And the reason I wanted to do a welcome to Delta, a lot of people don't think about this, but we hire ramp agents all over the world. You can be hired in Des Moines, Iowa to work on the ramp or the ticket counter, and they never actually get a chance to come to the headquarters of Delta, where Delta is headquartered in Atlanta, because there is no reason to come here. They don't come here for training. They get trained in their station. So there's no reason to come here. They might come here for some type of class or event at some time. But we have agents out there that have been with Delta for 10 years and have never been to the headquarters. And I really wanted them to be able to see what is the headquarters other than just this office building in Atlanta where all the people make the decisions for them. That we have the museum here. We have, the history of Delta here. It's just it's a very cool place to come and visit. So I thought, well, the only way they're actually going to get to come and visit it or want to come and visit it on their own is to show them what we have. And also, for a new hire, I can sit and tell you in a classroom or give you some papers and say, hey, Delta started on this year and this is how it started and this is, where the history of Delta is. But when it really immerses you into the virtual reality world and you're kind of walking through the general office, walking through the museum, people are talking to you. The operations control center, which is kind of what we call the rock of Delta. There's actually a rock right outside the door. That's kind of like, that's the headquarters. That's the central point. That's where all the decisions are made 24 hours a day for Delta, all the flight operations. Everything is made from there. We have meteorology team, and a lot of people don't realize, even if you work for Delta, we have 12 meteorologists that work for Delta, and we have a staff of I think 3 or 4 on staff 24 hours a day, just looking at weather. So they don't get to see that. So this brings them in and gives them a really view of what we do here at the general head office. Next from there, we have a couple other ones right now that we're using. One is our ramp operation. We're in the process of updating that right now, but it's used for just kind of reinforcement of wing walking, the proper positions and procedures for walking in an airplane. Marshaling, which is parking the airplane, when they're bringing the airplane into the gate or pushing the airplane out of the gate. All the safety procedures once they park the airplane, chalking procedures and safety procedures around the airplane. And then the third one is our De-Ice program that we're using.
So I want to talk about the ramp training just for a second, because I, like most people, have flown on planes a lot, but I had never actually thought about what's happening around the plane. And I think I heard about this a few years ago, and it kind of blew my mind too. And you're going to have to speak to this more, but my memory was there was 14 or 15 different activities. There's potentially a high rate of injury or a potential for injury. Training folks on the ramp is difficult because you have to decommission a plane. If you have a new hire, getting them FFA clearance takes time. So that's at a high level what I knew. And it just felt like, wow, that is the perfect use case for VR training. So maybe talk a little bit about just the ramp operations themselves.
Yeah. And you're absolutely correct. So when we're training our new hires and we take them out on the ramp to look at the airplane and get to touch the airplane and feel the airplane, a lot of people don't realize that we're doing that on live airplanes that are being turned. We don't have airplanes just sitting around that we can go out and train on. And if an airplane's not in the sky, it's not making us money. So we have to turn those airplanes very, very quickly. So they land, they're they're unloaded, they're refueled, they're cleaned, they're turned in sometimes 35 to 40 minutes. And that operation is moving very quickly outside. So the ramp agents that are working, they kind of work with you, but they get a little aggravated when you have a group of 5 or 6 new hires around the airplane because they're kind of getting in the way and they're slowing down their operation. They have a time they have to get this airplane pushed out, or it takes a delay. So, we're trying to, show them things around the airplane. So in the virtual reality world, we can show them this and let them, look at how the panels are opened properly, how the doors are opened, what happens if you do this, where can't you walk around the airplane, in the virtual reality world, as you're walking around, if you walk over a hose, and some people don't even notice this, there's a big yellow hose connected to the airplane that puts either heat in it in the wintertime or cold air for the summertime to cool the airplane down. If you're walking around inspecting the airplane when it arrives to make sure there's no damage or anything that happened to the airplane during flight, if you step over that hose, it's a safety hazard. You could trip and fall. Mm-hmm. People have done it. A good example of that I always like to tell is when we were doing our testing and we were bringing agents in and letting them do the VR and getting their feedback. I brought a gentleman in that he was from Fort Myers, Florida. He retired a couple years ago, but he had 40 years with the company. He worked on the ramp for 40 years. I brought him in, put the headset on him. He didn't like it. He didn't want to do the headset, but he said, I'll do it anyway. He put the headset on. He was doing the walk around, and he got to the air hose, and you had an option to go around or over. He went over, and it came up on the screen and said, that is a safety hazard stepping over the air hose. So he took his headset off, and he said, I've been stepping over that air hose for 40 years. I didn't know that was a safety hazard. He goes, I've probably been told in training 1,000 times. I said, probably. So he left, and he went back to the station, and he called me a couple weeks later, and he goes, I just want you to know I haven't stepped over that air hose since that day. He goes, it finally got me. He said, every time I come up through the air hose, I see that safety hazard and pop up in front of me. And I tell the other agents on the ramp, don't step over the safety or over the air hose. It's a safety hazard. So again, we've given him other type of learning, and he didn't get it, but in the virtual reality world, he did.
That's very powerful, because you've got somebody that's not, maybe super up to speed on technology, been in the company for 40 years, been doing the same thing for a long time. And in the first time in VR, it triggered something that has now stuck with them. I mean, that is a really significant aha moment, I think. And so tell us a little bit. I think was that your initial proof of concept? I mean, what was the process to get buy-in going forward? Was that the aha moment that you used?
Yeah, that was the aha moment. Yeah, we did that proof of concept, and it was just, we called it aircraft walk around, because when an airplane arrives, the duty of one of the agents, the lead agent on the flight, is just to do a walk around the airplane to check to make sure there was no damage. And they look for several things: damage on the airplane, did something happen, during flight that we didn't know about? Is there any what we call FOD on the ground, which is foreign object debris, which is things laying around the airplane, zippers that fall off suitcases, bag tags that fall off suitcases? Because when the airplane's taxiing in, those engines can actually suck that up into the engine, and they're a big, powerful engine, but they're very delicate, because if that engine sucks up a zipper, it could take that engine out, and it could cost several $1 million, with that. So that's one of the things it looks for. It looks for safety hazards of where you're walking around the airplane, not taking shortcuts and walking underneath the airplane to get to the other side. So that was our proof of concept, and it gave you a score at the end and said, hey, you scored 85%, and this is what you missed. You missed picking up these items off the airplane, or, you missed this damage. It became, I try not to use it, but I do. It became a type of game for them, because their buddies would score higher, and they're like, oh, I'm going to do it again. I want to see if I can get a better score than they did. Wow. I did a proof of concept.
How often did people request to redo the old training? What I was going to ask, what was the old training? What did the VR replace?
Well, the old training is just an instructor-led course. It's just instructor-led basic ramp, classroom environment, and taking them out and walking them around. Yeah, and it replace. That's what that was replacing.
I'm curious, what has been the most successful VR program that Delta has run to date? Can you kind of give us an overview?
Yes, I would have to say that's our De-Ice program that we've been using the past. We've used it two seasons now, De-Ice seasons. When I talk De-Ice season, our De-Ice season starts in October and goes through about April is when we're de-icing airplanes. So that, I would say, to date is the most successful program that we used, and to give you an overview of where it came into play. So in the past, or still, our de-ice agents are trained in the summertime, in July. So in July, we bring all of our de-ice agents through Minneapolis to they call it a de-ice boot camp, where they go through an instructor-led training. Then they go out to an airplane that is actually sitting on the ramp that they can get in trucks, and they can go up and spray the airplane, and they spray water on the airplane, and they do everything, and it's summertime, and it's nice and clear, and everything's good. Then they go back to their stations. Once they're back in their stations, obviously they're not de-icing airplanes. So sometimes it might be 3 months before they actually have a de-ice event somewhere where it's snowing, or they're getting some freezing rain, or it's cold. So you got to remember, or even think, if I'm trained on something 3 months later, I get the call that it's time to go de-ice an airplane. I'm thinking, oh gosh, do I remember how to do this? So we do proficiency checks So they would do proficiency checks where they would actually go into the station. We have ground safety advocates that go into the stations, and they actually would watch them de-ice airplanes. If they're there de-icing airplanes, they would watch them do it and see if they're doing it right. But again, you had to find stations that were having a weather event. So unfortunately for these ground safety advocates, this team, they would get the call and say, hey, Boston's getting a snowstorm, go that way. So they would head to Boston. It's a snowstorm coming, and that's a good opportunity to go see how they're doing. So it was very hit and miss. So they were only getting, sometimes a few a day if they were getting that they could actually go. So the safety team came to me and said, hey, could VR solve this issue? And I said, absolutely. So we started looking into it and developing it. And then we rolled it out 2 seasons ago. So that would have been 2023 season, to see how it would work. It was very successful. We had 12 ground safety advocates that were traveling the system that year, going to different stations. Each one had 2 headsets with them in their kit. They would go into the station, they would set it up, they would bring them in. Throughout the 12, they were doing about 150 proficiency checks a day throughout the system, compared to the 5 or 10 we were getting in the past. So they didn't have to wait for an event. They could put them in a headset, and it was snowing, and they would put them in it, and they would go through, and it would, they would tell them if they did it correctly or not. So very successful. We upgraded the program from, the first year and said, hey, we got some changes. We're going to add some things into it. We added, different multiple airplanes. We added enclosed buckets, open buckets, because we have different types of de-icing trucks throughout the system. So we added that in the season for last year. Again, very successful. I think when I looked at my ArborXR, because it keeps track of all that for me, I think we had 2,650 something proficiency checks last season, which was amazing. And then, so we're actually working with Futurus right now. Just kicked it off 2 days ago that they're upgrading again, and we're doing some different things to the de-ice this year. So it's really proved to be a very good tool, a very good experience, and very beneficial to the de-ice program.
What an incredible use case. So you went from a few proficiency checks a day to 150 plus, massive increase. Now, we have to ask a few follow-up questions. This is such a great story. Are VR proficiency checks treated as equivalent to live action proficiency checks?
Yes.
Hard to say.
Yes, they are.
Wow.
Yeah. And actually on the proficiency check form that they keep on file at the very top, it used to say live event, I think, and then, or a water event where they had water in the truck still instead of de-icing fluid. Now it actually has VR. So they check VR. Yep.
I was going to ask that. Was there a cost savings associated with, I'm sure just being able to train more technicians is massive, but also in terms of materials or anything else used, was there a cost savings?
I wouldn't, there is a cost savings, and we're going to start really kind of tracking that this year. The first year or two is just, hey, will this work? Is it going to be, proficient? Is it going to, do what we need to do? I would say it is, because again, we were doing live events. So I try to, use an example. If I'm going to teach you how to drive in the snow, the only way I can see if you can do it right is to get in a car with you and go down the highway while it's snowing and hope you remember what you're doing. Because if you don't, you're going to wreck. In the VR world, like I tell people, hey, in the VR world, if you blast the window of the cockpit with de-icing fluid, which is a no-no, it's going to tell you, oh, you shouldn't do that. You failed. Well, guess what? Let's reset and try again. But in the real world, if you blast the window of the cockpit, with the de-icing fluid, you could put the airplane out of service for 3 or 4 days and cost us $200,000. Yeah.
That's where we talk about how this is a Dr. Jeremy Bailenson quote, but that VR is great for anything that's difficult, dangerous, or expensive to do in real life. So great example of something you don't necessarily want somebody trying in real life, but in VR, they can make that mistake and learn from it, which is, I'm curious. So one of the things I know that a lot of people listening, if they're thinking about building out a program, is how do I how do I track that this is actually working? How do I get buy-in? And you've had now several goes at this and a process of getting buy-in from leadership. But talk a little bit about, you mentioned being able to monitor and see the usage. What things are you looking at to see if this technology is actually being used in a way that makes sense? For, it's a big investment for companies to think about getting into a new technology stack like this.
Yeah, I mean, and backing up to 2017, before the technology and before I learned more, I just, I had, I think 19 headsets, and I would send them to a station. And good example is I had 19 headsets out in the stations being used just to test them. And the pandemic happened. I went home. Like everybody else, I went home for the week or two that I thought I was going to be home. I'll be back in a couple of weeks and we'll be right. Well, 4 months later, I came back and everything has changed. And guess what? I couldn't remember where I sent those headsets. I had a Excel doc somewhere, but I didn't even know where that was. I kind of lost track of everything. Fortunately enough for the stations, they were very honest. Months went by and I would get emails. Hey, what am I doing with this VR set that I have sitting here? I was like, oh, send it back to me. Thank you. So when we came back and we started using the Pico, I was introduced to ArborXR. And by Futurus, and he said, hey, we have ArborXR, that this is what we use to manage our headsets. And I was like, oh, interesting. Let me see what this is. And when I sat with them and they showed it to me, I was like, this is a game changer again. Is this a new thing? And they're like, no, it's not really new. It's just what we use. Again, I'm learning as I go. So, the ArborXR system really made a big aha moment for our leadership when I showed them, hey, this is how I track the headset. This is how I know what they're doing. This is how I know if they're updated. This is how I can, assist the people out in the stations, because the question always came up, well, what if we send headsets to a station, JFK? What if I send them? How are we going to know if they're using them? How are we going to know if they're up to date? How we know? Well, now with the ArborXR, I can tell you if they're updated. I can tell you when they're using them. I can tell you how many times they used them. I can tell you how many minutes they used them. I can tell you who used them. And the other big one that came from our IT security that I got questioned on, well, what do we do if somebody takes our headset? Well, now I can answer that question, because if I put a headset in a station and somebody decides I'm going to take this headset home, I can go onto the ArborXR. I can wipe it out. I can pretty much lock it down. I can also tell you where it is, because I can track it right down to the address of where it is. So if it comes up missing, I can just take all the content off of it, wipe that out. And if we don't get it back, we don't get it back. But I can tell you where it is. So we can contact the station and say, hey, Brad took the headset home last night. It's at his address. You might want to just let him know to bring it back. But they shouldn't be taken home. But that was a big game changer for that. And like I said, throughout the seasons, I go in there. And then again, with the ArborXR that was changed last year was the see-through, where I can actually connect to the headset, because I'm the only troubleshooter for the headsets right now. So I was getting calls, and you have to know that our ground safety advocates that are taking these VR headsets on the road, they are not technology people. These are De-Ice guys that have been with Delta. Some of them been here for 25 or 30 years. I gave them VR headsets just like they did me 5 or 6 years ago and said, here, go use these. Well, they would contact me before I used ArborXR, before I was on it, and say, hey, I can't get my boundary set right. Well, I would kind of walk them through of let me try to help you out. But now I can just connect to the headset through ArborXR and go click there, click here. Yep, there you go. Or, hey, my headset's not working right. My right hand controller is not working. I can click on the headset and go, well, your battery's dead. Oh, okay. Let me fix that. So I can troubleshoot, and it's been very, very helpful troubleshooting that way.
That's great to hear that. I'd love to hear more about your process with content. I mean, you had a great start with Dave and Foundry 45. I mean, those guys are legit. That's a great entry point. But once you had to make the transition, how did you decide to go with Futurus? I mean, what was your process, and what has it been like working with Futurus?
Yeah. Again, Dave introduced me to Futurus with Annie. And I will tell you how it worked. Dave actually contacted me at like 3:00 on a Friday and said, "Hey, talk to leadership at Axon that acquired Foundry, and they're not really interested in moving forward with VR for this De-Ice program that we kind of already not really started. We just were talking about it." He said, "But I don't want to leave you hanging. So I have, Futurus, Annie Eaton. I sent her an email and she said, yes, she's willing to talk to you." Literally at 5:00 on a Friday night, her and I met. We had a quick call. We met each other. I said, "This is what we want to do. This is our plan with De-Ice." She said, "Absolutely, we can do it." Within a week, we were up and running a meeting and getting Futures onboarded with us through our supply chain and getting the process started. And it's just been a great relationship to work with the team. They've helped me learn about VR. They're very open. Annie's always open to phone calls. The whole team is open. Anytime I would call them and say, "Hey, here's what I got," or "Here's what we need to do," or "Here's my issue," they would walk me through it and help me out. Being local, I've had other corporations contact me or talk to me and say, "Hey, how do I pick a VR company?" There's so many out there, VR developers. And as you guys can imagine, I'm contacted all the time by VR developers. I'll talk to them, but I like the local, not just because it's local, because I like to be able to go to the office. A good example for this year, the safety team said, "Hey, we want to do all these updates and upgrades to the De-Ice program." And I said, "Okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to send a few of your ground safety advocates. We set up a day. We went to the Futurus office. They sit right there in the office. They put the headset on and say, "Okay, at this point, we'd like to adjust this." And the developers just are taking the notes right there. That would be very hard to do if I was working with a company that was, on the other side of the, United States or out of the country. I can't just bring them in. With Elijah, that works for Futurist, kind of the main developer for the VR for us. He came to the Delta. He got in a De-Ice truck. He went up. He sprayed airplanes. He did everything live so he could feel what it was like to actually do it. And then said, "Okay, now I understand, what it feels like to be up here and what it looks like when we're developing this."
Yeah, very nice. That's great. So as we move to wrap, I have two questions for you, two last questions. The first is, you talk about, talking to other companies and being in VR. So another enterprise comes to you and says, "Kevin, you're years ahead of us in VR. We're thinking about launching a VR training initiative." What's the one piece of advice you give them?
The one piece of advice I give them is really do your homework on who you're going to work with. What VR developer you're going to work with. Again, I always say, wherever you're located, try to keep it kind of local, or, that they're willing to come to you, or you can go to them. The second piece is your headset that you're going to, what type of headset are you going to use? There's different headsets out there. There's all kinds of different things. Don't get wrapped up in the fancy wins and, get the sales pitch of, "Hey, this one's the best." I'm not going to really name the names, but, really talk to them. And it's just the relationships between the vendors, the headset, the developer. And then I do tell them, and you've got to have a management system of your headsets. I can't imagine having more than 5 or 6 headsets and not be able to manage them and know what they're doing if you're using them, and be able to have that data on there of a ArborXR.
Yeah, that's great advice. Okay, and one kind of fun question, as much as you can share, and you can answer this either from Kevin's perspective or the company's perspective, but what is the future of VR at Delta?
I really see the future of VR really growing in the next year or two. This year was kind of a slowdown for Delta. We were doing good financially, but it was kind of reset. Let's look at, our finances. So we kind of could have, not a hold, but a slowdown on big projects, but now it's kind of really starting to pick back up. I'm getting a lot of questions, a lot of input from other departments. So we have flight ops, we have, tech ops, we have in-flight, We have several other departments that are really interested in VR. I tease them. I say, you guys let me jump off the ledge to see if I survived or not, and now you're all willing to, come with me. So they're all very interested. And, the key thing, with Delta, some corporations like, I work with Chick-fil-A a lot. We collaborate a lot on things. Chick-fil-A is different, but Delta, we have several different we have tech ops learning. We have in-flight learning. We have, ACS, which is where I am. We have several different learning organizations, and they're all kind of doing their own thing. And we're all kind of coming together now and saying, hey, let's stick together and look at this as one group. I actually brought our innovation team in recently. So our innovation team is, bringing everybody together instead of saying, hey, instead of you off buying this headset and Kevin's buying this headset and you guys are using this developer and we're using it, let's all look at this together. And that way we're working as one instead of, battling back and forth of, who's the best developer and so on. So, and who's the content manager and, and the headset that we're using.
Somebody has to be the first one to jump always. So you know what, when you jump and you survive, it's kind of like, all right, it was Kevin's the guy, right? So,
I will tell you, my wife laughs at me all the time because, when I tell her I'm doing a podcast or I'm going to a conference, I've been invited to talk. She's like, coming from the guy that I'd teach you how to log into a computer 28 years ago so you could get a job at Delta. I am not technology, and you can edit this out or not, but my grandson, obviously, he's 12 years old. I bought him an Oculus Quest 4 years ago. He's always playing his games, and he comes over and puts my headset on and does the ramp operation. He does the de-ice operation. He gives me advice. He gives me input on it. Well, why don't you do this? Or why can't it do this? Why can't the headset? And I'm like, hey, we're not Fortnite here. We're Delta. So, but he gives me great input on it. And then, when I have people put headsets on that struggle with using it and they get aggravated, I tell them I understand. I do, because I can put a headset on and click on the de-ice program and I can click through it. But my grandson brings his headset over and says, hey, play this game. He gets mad at me because I can't figure out how to shoot somebody. And it's like, well, you didn't teach me how to use the buttons properly here,
Oh, that's awesome. Well, now we know that the secret, you kind of gave it away. I was trying to give you props as the secret to success, as the one who jumped, but it's your grandson. He's the secret to success for Delta.
You got to bring the younger generation in. You ask, advice to give other corporations, attending good conferences. You get so much information out of the conferences, that they have throughout the year. And attending those and just talking to people and listening to what other corporations are doing and what they've been doing or what they're looking to do. I went to a conference October in Houston. We found ourselves in the lobby of the hotel. It was Delta, American, Alaska, Frontier, and United, all sitting in a lobby hotel comparing what we were doing in VR and talking about it. We're all competitors, but we were all one, because it was like, we're all there to help each other. So I said, it's not a secret. It's like, here's what we're doing. And they're like, that's cool. Here's what we're doing. Oh, that's really cool. Yeah, that's
cool. But you didn't tell them about your grandson, I'm sure. That's the key, right?
I left him out of that. Yeah, I left him out of that.
Oh, man. Well, Kevin, this has been awesome. A lot of fun, and I feel like a ton of great info. So I really appreciate you taking the time. I'm sure you're busy, and we look forward to catching up with you soon at one of those conferences.
All right. Thank you all for having me. Thank you.
Man, we've seen it time and time again that working with a good content creator is just so key overall, but especially in that early proof of concept.
Yeah, it's true. Futurus is killing it. And it was fun to hear the behind the scenes from Kevin. I've heard it from Futurus' side, but one of the things that stuck out to me on the de-icing side of things was, we've often at an academic level talked about this idea that VR is great for things that are difficult, dangerous, and expensive to do in real life. Well, their training hits all of those buckets. And not only that, but it's saving them money. It's making their trainers more efficient. And these are trainers that, like he mentioned, are not technical trainers. So they're leveraging this new technology to do something they've already done. They're just doing it way better. It's going to make for a more safe work environment. It's obviously saving the company money. And my guess is that we talked about, I loved the gamifying aspect. maybe there's a future Delta Fortnite collaboration coming. But just even the anything you can do in your training simulations, even if it's fire extinguisher training, adding in little things that employees can mess around with just for fun to make it engaging, you're going to get better results. You're going to have people, when they do it and they're holding, they've got it in their hands, they've got whatever the hoses that they're spraying, the de-icing, it's going to stick with them with muscle memory much more than anything on a PowerPoint slide or, and especially the fact that they can do it over and over again and then get a green light, make sure that they've passed all the checks. I think it's so huge.
Yeah, I don't know how you get a better aha moment than someone who's gone through traditional training for 40 years, finally having a change in behavior because of VR training. Yeah. I mean,
I've heard it 1,000 times and I've basically ignored the training, which right. All of us who've gone through some kind of safety training, you watch it and you check the box saying you finished it, but being able to put a headset on, and I don't know if the hose blows up on you if you step over it, but just being able to do it in a virtual environment, something clicked for this employee that had been, learning this, safety instruction for 40 years and never actually complied. So it's huge. And we're hearing that across the board. I mean, so many companies are reporting back that this is dropping safety incidences, and employees are engaged with the training, so that it's sticking with them, they're retaining it. But also because, again, it's muscle memory, they're able to avoid actions that are going to cause them to be injured, that are very difficult to simulate in real life.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, as always, we appreciate you spending a little bit of time with us. Make sure you check us out wherever you listen to your podcasts, and we will see you next time.